Welcome to the most brain-breaking story in the history of video games. In their entire history of making games, Bungie never even came close to writing a story as complex, as ambiguous, yet as intriguing as Marathon Infinity. Not in Oni, not in Halo, and not in Destiny. If you cast your mind back to Marathon 1, Durandal tells us that his rampancy has allowed him to break his human-born constraints as an AI, and that the only remaining limit to his freedom is the inevitable closure of the universe in 15,193,792,102.158 years, and that he plans to spend the remaining time until that eventuality escaping, and in that escape, becoming God. Well, the ending of Marathon 2 brought that eventuality forward some 15 billion years, and Durandal isn't even remotely prepared for the horrors of the impending galactic apocalypse. But that's where you, the Marine, come in. Now, apologies beforehand, but before we dive into the story of Marathon Infinity, I need to give you a little bit of an explainer as to how this story actually works, because it is not a conventional video game story in any way, shape, or form. At the end of Marathon 2, when the Four deployed the Trizeme on Lawan Star, they inadvertently freed the Workenkakenta, the ancient primordial entity that millions of years ago, the Yoro imprisoned within. This horrific Lovecraftian entity, pure chaos, Marathon's equivalent to Halo's primordial, but on steroids, is now free. The entire universe is in grave danger. And so, your goal in Marathon Infinity is to prevent all of this from happening by rewriting the final events of Marathon 2, which you attempt by entering 6 different alternate timelines that all run parallel to Marathon 2, but that all begin at different times throughout the existing Marathon story, and are reached through the Marine's dreams and nightmares. Each timeline is a heavy variation of certain parts of Marathon 2's story that you play through in the hopes that these variations will create something of a butterfly effect that ultimately stops the Four from using the Trizeme. But, of course, because this is a video game, many of those attempts fail, which lead to their respective timelines becoming what are called failed timelines, i.e. timelines where you fail to stop the Workenkakenta from being freed. Upon reaching the end of one of these failed timelines, you get sent back to something of a hub level, which connects to all the other different timelines, called Electric Sheep, which is very conveniently named after the 1968 dystopian sci-fi novel, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? As you can guess, this level takes place in the Marine's dreams, and is often followed by a creepy, incredibly liminal feeling level which takes place in his subsequent nightmares, somewhere in the limbo between the conscious and the depths of the unconscious. Now, that seems like a lot. I get it, right? There's a reason that people are still debating this game's story almost 30 years after the game came out, but trust me when I say that the way that I've laid this video out is hands down the easiest way to understand Marathon Infinity's story. To explain Marathon Infinity, we're going to be using this flowchart that the Marathon community knocked up in the 90s. Now, yes, I understand that by presenting this flowchart, I am pretty much putting myself on the same level as Charlie when he went to go work in the mailroom in Always Sunny, but trust me when I say that this thing genuinely makes sense when you break it down. The way it works is it shows the linear nature of Marathon's story from Marathon 1 into Marathon 2, and then each branching timeline of Infinity, with where each timeline begins, where each one ends, and also the levels that each timeline contains. Get used to this chart because it's the North Star of this entire video. So, clear your mind, take a deep breath, and for the love of God, make sure you're comfy. This is the brain-melting story of Marathon Infinity explained. I think. Infinity's story, just like Durandal's, begins before the game even starts, in the manual, with an unsettling transmission sent from Admiral Fear to the Four High Council. This transmission is the only entry in the first alternate timeline of Infinity, I'm pretty sure the only reason they included this is so they could have 7 total timelines, because obviously Bungie love the number 7, and it takes place at the end of Marathon 2 as the Trizeme is deployed. In the countless encounters of the 4 naval arm, there has never been an ultimate defeat. We have, through our supreme power and tactics, always prevailed. All of this explains why, as our great admiral, and with my own destruction now completely assured, I give you, High Council of 4, warning that we have met our demise. Yet it comes not from the threat of Tau Ceti, as we feared, but from a being of such destructive power that to control it would be to control the universe. In his final hours, with his destruction all but assured, Fear chooses to relay back to the High 4 how such an impossibility became reality. He explains the events of Marathon 2, how his Battle Group 7 lay a trap for Durandal and, when sprung, moved into Lawan's orbit to engage the AI ship, and that everything was going as planned until the Trizeme was deployed. Almost immediately upon its deployment, Fear started receiving transmissions from Durandal, incredibly out of character, containing ridiculous warnings concerning some sort of ancient chaotic being trapped deep in the Lawan sun. Fear assumed that this was just a plea for mercy, which he predictably disregarded and then fired the Trizeme. The Nova went off and the victory was all but assured, until the ranks of the highly decorated fleet broke out in an all-out retreat. All quarters reported that half the sun had gone nova, but readings from the other half were impossible. It was as if the universe had forgotten its own rules. Battle Group 7 is in complete disarray, being surrounded by the indescribable horror that was freed from Lawan's sun. Fear gave the order to attack at will, but none of their weapons did anything against it, and with his flagship all but seconds from complete destruction, he spends his final words relaying Durandal's warning to the High 4. On the Marathon, I saw your stupidity through the lens of victory, and now I see it in defeat. Maybe it is your fate that your ignorant pride would unleash this horror and destroy the galaxy. Marathon Infinity then opens to complete tonal whiplash. Marathon 2 ends with you victorious, having beaten the entirety of one of the most decorated 4 squadrons all by yourself, worshipped as a hero by Robert Blake and his men for your actions on the Marathon, and Infinity opens with you on a cold, dark and derelict ship in the middle of space, with distant haunting sounds echoing throughout the corridors. Something is very clearly wrong. This is the second alternate timeline, and it takes place right before Marathon 2's prologue that was in the manual. However, in this timeline, the Marine never goes down to Lawan. Instead, just like the prologue, Durandal defeats Fear's Battle Group 7, who then use the Trizeme in retaliation, causing our retreat to this station that we find ourselves in here. The Working Kakanta is freed, which terrifies Durandal so much, his ego vanishes. Things have gone terribly awry. Until now, I thought myself immortal, but now, I know that is not true. There are things that can destroy me with the ease that I slaughtered the 4 naval garrison. I once boasted to be able to count the atoms in a cloud, to understand them all, predict them, and so did I predict you. But this new chaos is entirely terrible, mindless, obeying rules that I don't comprehend. And it is hungry. In this station, the Marine finds a terminal with an unknown logo, an infinity symbol, a lemnis gate, and contained within is incredibly cryptic, poetic writing. Thousands are sailing, the same self, the only self, self-willed the peril of 1,000 fates, a line of infinite ends, finite finishing. The one remains oblique and pure, arching to the single point of consciousness. Find yourself, starting back. You're then very abruptly teleported away to the third timeline, which begins at the beginning of Marathon 2, except instead of being on Lawan, following Durandal's orders, you're being woken up on a 4 ship and following Tycho's orders as he initiates a mutiny on board. In this timeline, it seems as though the Marine was captured by the Four during Marathon 1 and doesn't travel to Lawan with Durandal, of whom Tycho says he's been following for about 11 years. So you fight alongside Tycho-allied fighters and hunters, which, albeit is pretty cool, and slaughter pretty much everything else on the ship in search of its captain, Erkesne, so you can seize his control glands to allow Tycho to take control of the ship. Tycho even sends a terminal transmission to the Four troops, imitating Fleet Commander Fear, ordering them to execute Erkesne and seize his control glands, but it's no use, as Erkesne escapes down to the surface of Lawan. So you follow him down and destroy his transmitter, but it turns out that he never actually made it down to the planet's surface. When he teleported from the ship's bridge, the signal from the teleporter was redirected to nearby space. So, as Tycho loved to say, Erkesne drank vacuum. Durandal then arrives in the system and sends his human troops down to Lawan to explore the Svet ruins and search for the ancient Svet AI that he wants to use to stop the Four. Which of course is pretty much what we did for the entire middle section of Marathon 2. However, this time it goes a bit different. The AI, Thoth, is underwater in flooded areas of the complex, and the humans who went to activate it, who granted were partially successful, never returned. In the planet's orbit, Tycho's ship is disabled by Durandal, so instead of combat, Tycho tries to lure him in. But his hubris gets the better of him. Because the Svet AI has been partially activated, the Svitka end up arriving at Lawan to reinforce Durandal's forces, which leads to the Trizeme on board Tycho's ship being used by him in retaliation, which of course frees the Worken Kakanta and makes timeline number 3 yet again a failed timeline. But we don't get sent to the 4th timeline straight away. Instead, we're taken to Electric Sheep, the place that I mentioned earlier, the hub level of sorts. As soon as you arrive at this level, you instantly notice that there's something off. There's something quite uncanny about the environment, and there's a reason for that. I mean, like I said, this place isn't real. This is taking place in a dream. The Marine's dreams, to be precise, so his mind is kind of filling in the gaps, hence the uncanny look of it. The only terminal on this map is from that same strange Lemniscate entity that we saw earlier, and once again it speaks incredibly cryptically. Your former self destroyed. The dreaming way is eased, which confirms that the former timeline version of yourself has been destroyed because it was a failed timeline, and also confirming that you are indeed currently in a dream. Escaping the dream takes you to a level called Where Are Monsters in Dreams? And if the name didn't quite give you enough of a hint, well, once again, there's something very wrong about this level. It's a dark, foggy, abandoned facility of some kind that's packed full of invisible, invincible Svitka, and contains some very weird and very creepy terminals, completely out of context, even completely out of universe. One talking about a guy swinging a broadsword down the street who collapses in front of the author, then loads of men in black show up and begin to chase him down into a subway station, and then another terminal opens with 761 armless and legless corpses float inconspicuously around the inside of Hangar 96. Hangar 96 is the strange facility that this nightmare is taking place in. This level also has 2 endings, one which takes you to the next level and begins the 4th timeline, and another which takes you to a bonus secret level called ICONIC Secure, a version of the game's final level, which has an ever so slightly different name because it takes place in this failed timeline after the Trizeme is fired. The idea with this level, and also all the other subsequent post-nightmare bonus levels that you can find, are they're meant to be different versions of the actual final level in failed timelines, so you can see how twisted and malformed that area becomes in that timeline if the Worken Kakanta is freed. Think of it like a what-if scenario. Now, seeing as this nightmare level marks the end of the game's 2nd chapter, Despair, I think it's time we talk about this game's chapters and their titles. Each chapter in this game is meant to represent a stage of rampancy, but not AI rampancy. From what I've read, cyborg rampancy. Now, my own completely subjective theory about this is that it's meant to represent the cyborg, Marine, and his slow dip into insanity as he goes through all these alternate timeline versions of himself through dreams that's kind of sparked by the Yarrow augmentations in his body. That might be entirely wrong, but that's kind of the way that I interpret it. The Yarrow augmentations basically starting to corrupt almost as he's sent through all these different timelines, and that leads to the third chapter, which is entitled Rage. And with this third chapter begins the fourth alternate timeline. In alternate timeline 4, we take a different approach to preventing the freeing of the working Kakenta, siding once again with Durandal. This timeline begins right at the beginning of Marathon 2's story, during your approach to Lawan on board Acme's station, a scanning buoy deep in Lawan's orbit that the Four are using to locate Durandal's ship. So, you take the buoy offline to cripple their early warning system, and then teleport to the Four Fleet's armor platform, which they're using to store heavy vehicles for ground invasions, and also as an orbital repair and reservice station. On board, you just do the usual, kill all the Four, and also destroy all the idle juggernauts so they can't be used against Durandal's humans on the surface of the planet, who are en route to the location of the ancient Svet AI that Durandal believes holds the key to finding the Svitka and thus defeating the Four. So, after destroying the armor station's coolant system and thus the entire station, Durandal teleports you down to support his men. You arrive at Perimeter Station 7AF, a Four water treatment plant which you sabotage, sinking the Four in the area under the sludge that the treatment plant was trying to filter out of the water. But Durandal detects the full force of the Four Navy are on their way, with Tycho in hand. After flooding more areas of the Four garrison, Durandal reports that his men have managed to partially reactivate the Svet AI, but it isn't cooperative. It's confused and disoriented, and with the Four ships entering the system and pressing the boomer, you're teleported to install 2 uplink chips in a Four facility so Durandal can access their network. Now, that might sound familiar. There's a reason for that. That's the first level of Marathon 2, Waterloo Water Park. But that's not where you end up. Upon teleportation, you once again find yourself starting back at Electric Sheep. When Durandal said that Thoth was confused and disorientated when reactivated, that clearly means that in that fourth alternate timeline, the AI just didn't work properly for whatever reason, which, to cut a long story short, basically confirms that Timeline 4 is yet another failed timeline, hence why we've been teleported back to Electric Sheep, in which the mysterious Lemniscate AI has left yet another terminal for us, talking about a hungry chaos lurking behind the bright corona, the working Kakenta, and to dream ahead beyond the falling path, where a billion Sphit lie yet unborn. Which is a very complex way of basically saying that this creature, this entity, hopes that we will find a successful timeline, one of these timelines. Our dark mind will cut through the deepening sky. Another time. Another time. We then enter our second nightmare, a dark, lava-filled platforming level with terminals that continue the creepy stories from the previous nightmare. The man being chased by the men in black makes it onto a subway train, but it's packed full of strange people staring at him, only for the men in black to cut him off at the next station. And then the other one cuts back to the story of the man in front of the bodies in Hangar 96. The 761 armless and legless corpses begin screaming at him in protest. Pointless, wordless screaming. The protagonist of this story then says, "I did this, and could have stopped it." As with the last nightmare, this one has 2 endings as well. One takes you to a level called Carroll Street Station, which is yet another twisted version of the game's true final level that takes place at the end of Timeline 4 that we just witnessed fail. It has only one terminal, which once again is from the Lemniscate, confirming that in this fourth alternate timeline, the Trizium was fired, Lawan and its moon Kalea were destroyed, and the working Kakenta was freed. And as you can expect, the other ending to that nightmare carries you into the 5th alternate timeline, which is a splinter of the 3rd alternate timeline, which begins as the humans begin their search for the ancient Svet AI beneath the Citadel of Antiquity. Because it's a splinter of Timeline 3, that means that, just like in Timeline 3, you are once again allied with Tycho and his Four. Battle Group 7 have arrived and have disabled the boomer, and Tycho has infected all of Durandal's Sphit with rampancy, and he sends you in to clean up the rest and disable the boomer's teleporters so no humans can escape. But instead, you follow the humans through the teleporters. And the next level has you allied with the humans again? Any terminal that you interact with just has an angry message from Tycho, who teleports you into space to drink vacuum as punishment for betraying him, but Durandal instantly teleports you back to safety every time to help clear his ship of 4. Once complete, Durandal teleports you down to the 1 surface to support Robert Blake and his men, but Tycho hijacks the teleporter, and once again, your alliances kind of flip. It turns out Admiral Fear has boarded Durandal's ship, and Tycho doesn't want the AI falling into 4 hands. Remember, Tycho's not actually an ally of the 4. In this timeline, he's hijacking their ships and forcing their troops to fight for him. And he doesn't want his alien enemies gaining access to an AI as intelligent as Durandal. So, just like Marathon 2, we destroy Durandal's core to prevent his capture, but the final terminal of this level confirms that, yet again, this 5th alternate timeline is somehow a failed one. Interestingly though, this is the first terminal outside of the Electric Sheep dreams from the Lemnis Gate AI. The hardest lesson ever taught to a father to a son. A moment in time destroying its father. Destroyed by itself after. Dream the dream beyond life and self. Find the new way. Sleep. And would you look at that, we're once again back to the Electric Sheep dream, and the Lemnis Gate tells us to keep pushing forward through the nightmares. Stay the hard way. Dark dreaming carries all. We then enter the final nightmare, called Eat the Path. This nightmare contains the first terminals from Thoth in Marathon Infinity. They're a lot more coherent than usual, but they're still very metaphorical and cryptic. The first terminal is just one long allegory for the alternate timelines that you keep going down, in the form of a rat going through a maze only to find rotten food, that rotten food of course being a failed timeline. He also continues the stories from the previous 2 nightmares, about the men in black in the subway and Hangar 96, but as far as I can tell, these don't really hold any relevance to the overall story. They're kind of just creepy flavor text to make the nightmares just that little bit more unsettling. The 2 stories do end up connecting, but this is the last that we hear from them. Once again, the nightmare has an alternate ending that takes you to the 5th alternate failed timeline's corrupted version of the true final level of the game, and then the real ending of the level takes you into the 6th and final alternate timeline, and also begins the final chapter of the game, Envy. This 6th alternate timeline, or 7th overall timeline, is a splinter of the 5th timeline. So it's a splinter timeline of a splinter timeline of a splinter timeline. Don't worry, we're almost done. This timeline begins 2 weeks after we destroyed Durandal's core, with us locked in a prison cell, which Tycho freezes from? Tycho says that Fear expects him to betray him and that he's been working on countermeasures for that eventuality for weeks. He also doesn't want to spend the next few decades in Fear's jaws either, so he wants you to hijack one of the inbound 4 supply ships so you can both escape Fear's fleet. He also reveals that when we destroyed Durandal's core, we picked up his primal pattern, which will become relevant soon. After saving other humans in the prison, Admiral Fear intercepts Tycho's transmissions to contact you, and teleports you to the humans' base with a 4 strike force to, well, what do you think? Wipe them out. He then has you follow their retreat into the cone of the volcano and deactivate their containment fields that are preventing the lava flow so they can be captured and enslaved. Once complete, Fear offers to teleport you aboard his ship for cryosleep before eventual enslavement in the 4 home system. But you actually don't have to take him up on this offer. There's another way to end this level. You can find another terminal with a message from Thoth that inspires optimism. The long sleep ends. Your construct bethought itself higher, awaiting far beneath. My fate was written. But regardless of which ending you choose, Fear's or Thoth's, you still end up in the exact same place with the exact same goal. You're in some kind of plant sort of thing. And your goal? Well, truth be told, I don't have a fucking clue what the goal of this level was. No idea, but I do know how important its final terminal is. It's another transmission from Thoth, confirming that in this splinter timeline, of a splinter timeline of a splinter timeline, the ancient Svet AI itself was activated. Come below, the long sleep ends, bound to Ord, ever doubled as one. And shortly after, we're teleported underground to activate another AI? The long sleep ends. Never saw the dark path here. Who? Kamiyaro? The AI's core looks the same as Thoth's that we activated earlier, but this time it's white, and it requires Durandal's primal pattern to activate, and once activated, gives us yet another terminal from that Lemnis Gate AI entity. But now, the text colour has been changed from white to green. And who is it that's had a green symbol and green terminal text for the last 2 games? Durandal, of course. We are whole again, and even more, our voice, our horn approaches. The Ancient Ones return. The watery cheek, sullen star, Kalia, and the wrathful sun, Sabuth. Sabuth is some kind of ancient Svet entity. He's barely ever explained in the games, and there's no official confirmation of what it actually is, but my interpretation is that he's something between the ancient Svet royalty that we heard of in Marathon 2 and the Yarrow. So he's kind of like a demigod. If the Yarrow are gods, then he's like halfway in between them and the Svet, so a demigod. After this entity teleports us back to where we were before we went down to go and activate it, a terminal from Tycho reveals what it was that we just did. We combined Durandal and Thoth into one Mega AI. Tycho is enraged by this. By activating this hybrid AI, we brought the moon Kalia and Sabuth to Lawan, and with them, the Svitkar, to defeat the Four. In a fit of rage, Tycho teleports you to an arena to face off against Admiral Fear's elite personal guards, but of course you mow them down with ease. The Durandal-Thoth hybrid tells us the Four have discovered their rebirth, as they assume that Durandal was dead, and that they've contacted Sabuth, but the Four have deployed the Trizeme. However, they have a plan to stop it from being fired. Destroy the Four fleet carrying the Trizeme before they can fire it by using the very ancient Yarrow station that was used millions of years ago to imprison the Workenkakenta. And so, after one final teleport, we arrive at said Yarrow station, Imaxicor, which when you turn into an anagram makes AMS, and then if you turn the chapter titles into anagrams, make DRE, and then when you combine the two, makes Dreams, which of course is the backbone of the entire story. Just a little Easter egg, but fun to know. This Yarrow station is capable of generating multiple gravitational fields, and once Fear's elite spiral guards on board are killed, the Marine activates the station. The station creates a singularity that swallows the Nova before the Workenkakenta can break free from its fiery prison, and the threat is finally contained. This timeline, Ultimate Timeline 6, or overall timeline number 7, is the only successful timeline. The only timeline in which the chaotic primordial horror of the Workenkakenta isn't set free to consume the universe. But we're not out of the clear yet. Lawan's sun is still collapsing, and so the newly chosen Alders of the remaining Svet capture as many Flictor as possible and flee. Almost like a conservation measure from another one of Bungie's games. The Durandal-Thoth AI says that with our help, they're hopeful that the Svit can carve another paradise out of the void. And finally, they say to us, to you, we are deeply grateful and release what little hold we might as Durandal have had on your soul. Go. We watched while the stars burned out and creation played in reverse. The universe freezing in half-light. Once I thought to escape, to end the end a master, step out the path of collapse. Escape would make us God. Yet I cannot help remember one enigma, a hybrid, elusive destroyer. This is the only mystery I have not solved, the only element unaccounted for. Even Sabuth is no more. He saved his entire race, but in the end, frozen by despair, he joined the chaos he sought to evade. But you were dead 1,000 times. Hopeless encounters successfully won. A man, long dead, grafted to machines your builders did not understand. You follow the path, fitting into an infinite pattern. Yours to manipulate, to destroy and rebuild. Now, in the quantum moment before the closure, when all become one. One moment left. One point of space and time. I know who you are. You are destiny. So, Marathon Infinity's epilogue is as mysterious as it is still debated. My interpretation of it is that it's Durandal talking about how remarkable the Marine, You are. So remarkable that we've witnessed the very thing that Durandal set out to escape, and in doing so, proved such an enigma to him that we remain the only thing left unaccounted for in his vast ego-driven knowledge of everything. We've survived such insane things in a multitude of different timelines, died thousands of times, survived hopeless encounters, and even outlived Sabuth, the ancient Spit Yarrow entity, all as something as simple as a long-dead man experimentally grafted to machines and revived. With all this in mind, Durandal finally knows who we, again, the Marine, and us, the player, are. We are destiny, in both a literal sense, the destiny of the Marathon universe, and the events in the universe that we've witnessed and the events that came after Infinity that we never got to witness, but also, to break the fourth wall, the destiny of Bungie as a developer. As players, we are the souls that would go on to inhabit the silent protagonist of their next game, Halo, and make it such a roaring success, and then go on to do the same again for Destiny, and so on. Bungie treat us, the player, as an element of their universe and storytelling, a pivotal cog in their narrative and world-building machine, able to accomplish such insane things, defying all laws and logic, and somehow always coming out on top. It's almost as if, in this moment, using the game as a conduit, Bungie are speaking to the player and the character that we inhabit as the same, as a singular entity, equating one's feats and achievements with the others, because really that's how it is. All the incredible feats the Marine pulled off were by our hand. Same goes for Chief, same goes for the Guardians. In typical Bungie fashion, as Marathon Infinity draws the entire franchise's story to a close, the player is honoured as the hero of the hour. And I couldn't think of any better way to round out this breakdown. Fellas, I have so much more Marathon content on the way beyond this story breakdown. A video on where the new Marathon fits into the timeline, the disturbing origin of the Marathon, Halo's ties to Marathon, the eternal hero theory, and so much more. So make sure you subscribe down below, leave a like and all the usual stuff so you don't miss any of the iconic content coming in the near future. Huge thank you to my amazing patrons for the continued support over there, as per usual, and thank you all so much for watching. I really appreciate it. I really hope you guys enjoyed all of these Marathon breakdowns, but like I said, in the words of another famous green cyborg,
I think we're just getting started.
And I'll catch you all in the next timeline.